Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pradibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaya Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarva Panishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us again. In this class, we'll be covering verses 5 through 8 of chapter 12 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Bhakti Yoga. We are basing the class on this text from Amrita Puri. It's been published in Amrita Puri some years back, and because it's ours, we're using it, and it's nice translation. We will take some liberties occasionally when needed, though. And regarding the flow, last time I did say that we were going to start with the questions, but I think the flow will be a little more natural if we cover the verses and end with the questions from last week, and we'll do the same next week as well. So we usually have a little bit of review at the beginning so that people can catch up and remember it's been a week, or you may be joining for the first time. So this chapter, 12th chapter, began with a question from Arjuna. He was asking Krishna, which is superior? Devotion that is based on a form, or formless devotion? And we were saying that it was a kind of a silly question, because it's like saying, which kind of person is better, those who like water or those who like water vapor? It's the same H2O, but it's a question, not a question of superiority or inferiority. It's just a difference in subtlety. And a subtler concept of God requires a subtler mind to understand, to grasp. So there's really no option between the two. It's a question of whether we are ready to worship or cultivate devotion for something that is formless. And ultimately, we need to be able to accept and practice both, because both are needed. However, we have to be clear that worshipping God with form and worshipping the formless Supreme cannot be practiced simultaneously, obviously, because they're antithetical to each other. So one involves a feeling of separation from God, while the other doesn't. And because a broad spectrum of people come to Amma, she embraces both. Thus, we too can appreciate both in our sadhana, depending on the subtlety of our mind at that time. God-realized beings have no sense of separation from the self, which means they are perennially experiencing that all-pervasive, formless reality, blissfully. Still, they sometimes intentionally create the feeling of duality. Like when Amma sings bhajans, you may see her, she's singing to Krishna or Shiva or Devi as though they were separate from her, and just rejoicing or just relishing the bliss of devotion. So she is creating a feeling of duality where none actually exists, just to relish the sweet bliss of devotion. Since we only understand God as being separate from us, it's kind of hard for us to understand what that means. But an example would be how we sometimes play along with children's games just for the fun of it. And to give you an idea of how I've done that before, and you all have probably done it before, I wanted to show you a few photos. Here you can see there's one. This is go back one more. See, this is about 10 years ago in the Tokyo ashram. The little girl there is about 3 years old. Amritavarshini from Japan, some of you may know her. She's now 13 years old. And we are sitting in a closet, actually, in Amma's room in the Japan ashram. Okay, next, if you go to the next one, she's crouching down. What she's doing is that this is her make-believe chai shop. And she was born in India, actually. And she's making chai for me. Okay, then the next one, we're both drinking our imaginary tea. Now, I promise you, I don't have a habit of going in the closet and just sitting in there for no reason. But when a 3-year-old child wants to, that's her reality at that time. She's making tea for me, and we're drinking it together. Just to relish the fun and the bliss of her innocence and that the game she's playing, I also got inside of the closet for fun. Okay. So it's not directly related to the Bhagavad Gita, but this is actually what Amma's doing for us. She's climbing into the closet of our limited minds, or she's allowing herself to be confined with those small, narrow conceptions of God, just so that she can play with us. That's the Leela of her life. Any realized being is basically pretending to see the world as dualistic. God likes this, we can reach God. All these kind of explanations imply duality, whereas they know that duality is not real. It's just an illusion, but it's real so long as we're not realized. So both saguna bhakti and nirguna bhakti, which means both devotion towards a form and devotion towards the formless, they're legitimate and necessary. A time will come for all of us, after a lot of contemplation of Amma's teachings, followed by a long period of assimilating those teachings, when we find ourselves drawn only to the formless absolute. That may sound like a long ways away, and it could be. We could call it the non-dual kind of devotion, but that devotion culminates in the complete dissolution of the devotee, and only God remains. So last week we were saying that Shankaracharya was saying that maybe it's not even considered devotion because there's no devotee anymore. Now, if we look at the lives of the gopis, we can understand how this progression takes place. First, after Krishna left Vrindavan and went to Mathura, the gopis were completely forlorn, and they could not bear to be without their Lord Krishna. And then after a few years, they began to understand that, his existence was greater than they thought. So after years of crying tears for him non-stop, day and night, they realized that he's not the son of Nanda and Yashoda. And they even sang that. They said, you are not the son of Nanda and Yashoda, but you are the inner consciousness behind all the bodies. You have taken this body for the sake of blessing your devotees. And then what happened? That was the amazing thing. Once the gopis understood that the Lord was not his physical body, but the consciousness behind that body, they understood that he is that consciousness in everybody, even themselves. And from the oneness created by their intense love, they realized, if the God is not his, if Lord is not his body, then I'm not my body. And I am nothing other than that all-pervasive consciousness as well. So the example of the gopis shows us that devotion to a form can lead us to the formless Atma or Brahman. They're the same thing. When you look at it from the individual standpoint, it's Atma. When you look at the totality standpoint, it's Brahman. So this being the case, Krishna deftly utilizes Arjuna's question in the previous class to give the only proper answer he can give Arjuna, which is he tells him what is best for him at that time. And this is what Amma does for all of us. When we ask questions, she is responding to that individual at that time. Some people she might say, come to the ashram and live there. And other people she will say, no, you stay where you are. You're doing good things for society. It's not a lie. It's the truth. And maybe they need to come a little bit later. All these teachings and advice that she gives us is for that particular person at that time. Then, in verses 3 and 4, which was also last week, with 8 strokes of his beautiful brush, Lord Krishna painted a picture of that which can never be pictured. That's Brahman. He gave 8 facets to that so beautifully. And he also shared 3 requisites one must fulfill in order to follow that path of formless devotion. It's not easy. There are certain requirements, you could say, or qualities that we need to cultivate. And he says that even those who practice devotion with form will reach him. But from what the Upanishads say, we can understand that that is not directly, because the Upanishads are pretty categorical in saying that only one who can understand God's formless aspect can reach moksha directly. It doesn't mean that they don't see God as having a form. It means they have to be able to do both. And here's a verse from one of the Upanishads, Kaivalya Upanishad, verse 10, that gives you an idea of the kind of statements we find in the Upanishads. Seeing the Atman in all beings, and all beings in the Atman, one attains the highest Brahman, not by any other means. So it's very clear that we have to learn how to see, become able to see the formless Absolute as well. And the final portion of last week's class was a beautiful phrase, Sarva Bhuta Hite Rataha. Those who revel in the welfare of all beings. This is something that Krishna is going to discuss in more detail in chapter 13. He's going to give us a list of qualities that we have to cultivate based on that teaching. Now we will enter the text again by chanting verse 5 of chapter 12. You can repeat after me. Klesho dikataras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta higatir dukkham dehavadbhir avapyate The meaning, I'm going to take a slight deviation from the translation in our book. No doubt the striving is greater for those whose minds are set on the unmanifest. For the goal of the unmanifest is very hard for the embodied to reach. So the embodied means us. We are people who not only have a body, we identify with that and we feel very strongly that that is us. And I mentioned previously that I like to quote a saint called Jnanadev from about 15th century Maharashtra. In his commentary of the Gita, he adds some additional description of those who strive to meditate on the unmanifest Brahman. Those who follow this path of yoga must share the hardest lot of misery. He's always very graphic. If a toothless person swallowed grains of iron, would that satisfy his hunger or put him to death? Is it possible for one to swim across the sea solely on the strength of one's own arms? Is it ever possible to walk in the sky? Just as it would be impudent for a cripple to challenge the wind, similarly, it is sheer foolhardiness for an embodied being to worship the unmanifest. So it sounds like a pretty solid endorsement of what Krishna is trying to convey here. However, we should understand that when Jnanadev says something like that, he's intending this message for those who are not prepared to meditate on the formless absolute, which is pretty much everybody, except for a small segment of the spiritual seekers. And though the ancient rishis have proclaimed that approaching the Supreme Being on the formless level is indeed the highest reality, this verse explains why some people, initially drawn to this path, end up abandoning it. Sometimes they lose all interest in spirituality because they're not ready for it. You may have seen some such examples, and I have seen a number of such cases. And I reached the conclusion that it's fraught with much more danger and pitfalls because it requires extreme vairagya, detachment, and inner strength. Now that doesn't mean that we shouldn't aspire for it. We have to aspire for it. But it means that first we need to cultivate a lot of dispassion and a lot of inner strength. You don't just say, oh, Ramana Maharishi did it. I read the book, it sounds nice. Maybe let me try this. And then you get into it and then you think that you've accomplished it, but it's not so easy. I have seen people who seemed to be fit for the path also, but were eventually consumed by their vasanas and even ended up losing their way, abandoning a spiritual life altogether. It's not a threat. I'm just saying that keep in mind that it's not for beginners. It's not something to just play with. You have to really take it seriously and evaluate yourself to see whether you're really competent and qualified. Krishna did say in the 7th chapter, all the devotees are noble, but the wise one I regard as my very self. But for me, the second half of that verse is where most people seem to fail. He continues by saying, with the mind and intellect merged in me, he is established in me alone as the highest goal. So, if we have any daydreaming in our sadhana, it means that's a disqualification. If we're not thinking of Amma the whole time or God the whole time, that's a disqualification. And the intellect has to be merged in Amma also. What does that mean? That means there's no intellectual battle going on inside, questioning whether we're on the right path. Is this worthwhile? There must be an easier way to do this. This is impossible in Kali Yuga for a householder. Whatever, these kind of intellectual analysis and doubting, the convictions that we have tried to maintain. The decay of our convictions shows that our intellect is not at all merged in Amma. So some people read books and they espouse the path of knowledge or quote Vedanta, but that does not make a person qualified to follow the path of non-dual devotion or the path of what is called Akshara Upasana. Means worshipping of Brahman. We can talk about it all we want, but our actions will reveal the truth. If not today, tomorrow. The only thing that will save us from losing our way is love. That's what I have found. If not a love for spirituality or a general love for spirituality or some spiritual practices, maybe we got it from a past birth. If we don't have that, at least we should have love for the Guru. I say at least because most people are not born with this tremendous, powerful spiritual samskara, we call it, a tendency from a past birth. They struggle with a lot of desires and worldly distractions. So the life buoy or that life raft for us in this ocean of samsara is the Guru. And we need to have love for the Guru to stay close to her. That love will invoke the Guru's grace, and from the Guru we will learn to love sadhana and learn to love spirituality, if we don't yet. I remember reading Amma's biography for the first time, just maybe within a week after I met her. And I was so impressed that she would chant her mantra with every step, even retracing her steps if she ever forgot to chant the mantra. I didn't have a mantra at the time, so I was just wondering what that would be like. About 6 months later, I found myself in Amritapuri, 30 years ago, and I was toying with the idea of getting a mantra. I wasn't ready for it, but when I got the mantra, I started practicing emulating her example. I thought, let me try it also. I wasn't so successful at it, I must admit, confess. But it was my intention, and it was my, I was inspired by her with it. If it were not for Amma's example, I wouldn't even have tried to do such a thing. So it was Amma's influence in my life that made me do that, and I think that's the case for many other people as well. This brings us to another important point. If we truly love Amma, we should be emulating her example and following her instructions. We all know from experience that this is no easy task at all. Amma has even said that the degree of a disciple's faith can be understood by the degree of his or her obedience to the Guru's instructions. And I think we all understand that one of Amma's most important teachings is that of universal love, rejoicing in the welfare of all beings. If we can't get along with our family members, relatives, or co-workers, how are we going to get along with all beings? Think about it. Before we try to achieve liberation by meditating on the formless absolute, I think it might be a good idea to start by just getting along with the people who are around us in our daily life. Here's a humorous example of someone who struggled and probably did not succeed. It seems that a man came home very late one Friday night after celebrating payday with his buddies. Some of you might know what that usually involves. He didn't have the decency to notify his wife that he would be late. So when he finally reached, you can just imagine how angry his wife was. She berated him for a long time, and then she concluded by saying, "How would you like it if you didn't see me for a few days?" The husband foolishly replied, "That would just be right, just fine with me." One day went by, but he didn't see her. 2 more days went by, the same result. Finally, on the 4th day, the swelling went down just enough so that he could see her out of a corner of his eye. She beat him black and blue. So, we're not that bad, I know. But we have the same negative emotions within. We just restrain them more than other people do. We know that it's wrong to, blow up in anger, explode at somebody like that. so we hide it. Doesn't mean we don't have those emotions. In Vedanta, in this philosophy of non-dualism, understanding it from the intellectual level is much easier than cultivating the mental qualities to practice it. That's the problem. That's why we see people who seem like charlatans, because they've understood it, they have a very sharp intellect, but they haven't cultivated those inner qualities. I'm not saying I have, I'm just saying that that's the hard part. And that's why Krishna says it involves great difficulty. Karma yoga and bhakti yoga also involve a lot of difficulty, but we endure them because some of them we kind of like our mind likes activity, it likes to be active and do things. So karma yoga is a little easier for us, and our heart loves Amma. So bhakti comes to us a little more easier. But one thing, from that standpoint, one thing that makes the path of knowledge so difficult is that we don't yet love the self. We don't yet love our true self because we don't understand it well enough. So one part of the process of jnana yoga, or the path of knowledge, is understanding what our self truly is, and then cultivating a love for that. Because the mind certainly doesn't like replacing the negative qualities with the positive ones, because it's so difficult. It's like trying to get a snake to eat vegetarian food. It just doesn't want it at all. The mind rejects all of our attempts to remove our vasanas. And this is why Krishna says that it is so difficult. It is very hard to reach for the embodied. Embodied means we're identified with the body and everything that comes with that body. It's not just the body itself. The body means we have attachment to the body, we have attachment to food, we have attachment to our clothing and our living space and our family and all these things. It's a package deal. Buy one, get 100 free. One of those kind of deals where you're stuck with all those vasanas that come along with it. So a body-centric existence means that, which is what we have now, means that our view of God will also be physical. We will think of God in superficial terms because we look at ourselves superficially. And honestly, that's the initial part of our relationship with Amma. We just look at her body. We want her to be in our physical presence. We want to be in her physical presence. We want to see her. We want to hear her voice. We want to have photos of her around. It's okay. That's why she's here. That's why she's taken birth, to help us connect with God through this beautiful, enchanting form of hers. But it also reveals the level that we are on right now. The body also needs water. So, since we cannot yet comprehend our own bodiless, formless essence, we also struggle to see God as a formless existence. Children look at adults and ask different questions based on their interests. Once I gave a program in Okinawa, Japan, and we were at a university actually, talking with the students. And we gave a talk about, Amma and basic spiritual things. And then there was a question-answer session, and a guy immediately raised his hand. And I thought, wow, these kids have interest in spirituality. Yes, what's your question? He said, what's your favorite food? Do you like Japanese food? And then I thought, and I said, yeah. I mean, I had to say yes. Yes, of course, I love Japanese food, And then other people will, ask about, I like the color of those robes. Why do you wear them? Do you have a perm on your hair? What's your favorite music? That's how they look at me. I mean, they don't think of me as Amma's disciple or as a Swami or anything like that. Just whatever is interesting to them is what they want to talk about. But that's the same thing. We can laugh, but our relationship with Amma is not a whole lot different. We project all our immature perceptions of God on her. So if we feel like we did something wrong, we committed a sin, we'll be very, cowering in front of her. Oh, she's going to punish me. She's the punisher for the sinners. Or if we need money, we might go to her and she's the one who's gonna make me rich. Or if I'm sick, I'll go, here's the person who's going to cure my disease. We're just projecting all of our concerns on her, whereas she's all of them and none of them at the same time, we could say. She's everything. So the idea of God being Satchidananda, pure existence, bliss, and truth. Existence, consciousness, and bliss. We can't understand that because we don't understand that about ourselves. One commentator on this verse went so far as to say, one who adores formless Brahman has to be free from the body feeling right from the beginning. The spiritually advanced soul alone rises to that level. It's a pretty extreme statement. These are people who have lived in previous times, when it was easier to do sadhana, and they've done a lot more sadhana than we have done. And they're saying that. So, we can't question really whether they're right or wrong. We have to just take it as wise advice from an elder. So until we fit that description, any of these descriptions, we can continue to use a form in quietening the mind. We don't have to feel bad about that. Let Amma or any other deity be the symbol of Brahman, of the Atman for us. And let's just try to remain established in remembrance of her. That's why he says me. Because whoever your beloved deity is, you can replace Krishna with that. Or you can meditate on Krishna also. In his commentary on this verse, Shankaracharya says, the toil is harder because they have to renounce, and he uses a Sanskrit word, it's all in Sanskrit, but I'm going to save this one because I want you to hear it. Dehabhimanam. Dehabhimanam, which means, if you translate it like directly, it would be having pride in your body. But here what it means is, it means body consciousness or body identification, the affection we have for this body, laying claim to the body. All of these things we're guilty of, you could say. It's a description of us. So, even though we cannot control the body, we lay claim to it. And like I said earlier, all of our attachments and problems are in some way connected with this body. So, are we done for? Is there no hope for us? No. There is hope for us. And Amma has already been guiding us on the right path. You're already doing, hopefully already doing, what is needed to reduce the body identification through the combination of Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. Technically speaking, it's supposed to be a process where you do Karma Yoga, and then as and when your bhakti becomes deeper and deeper, the Karma Yoga factor decreases. But like I said last week, around Amma, to me it seems more like our Karma Yoga becomes part of our Bhakti Yoga around Amma. It just gets consumed in the all-consuming love that we have for her, or that we learn from her. So these two put together help us to relinquish that body identification. Karma Yoga reduces our attachments, and Bhakti Yoga, or what we're calling here as Upasana, we're going to use that word more frequently, that expands our perception of God, and hence ourselves. The more we understand that Amma's essence is formless, the more we understand that the same about ourselves. And remember that Karma Yoga can include learning something new, to use that knowledge to serve the Guru or serve the world. I'm saying that because in COVID times it's really hard for people to go out and do selfless service. They often ask, what can we do? And this is one thing. You can try to learn a new skill that you can use, maybe not today, but tomorrow, to help other people, to serve people. So after discussing one topic for 3 verses, now Krishna is going to move on. And we'll read verses 6 and 7 together. Ye tu sarvani karmani mai sanyasya matparaha ananyenaiva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate teshamaham samuddhartha mrityu samsara sagarat bhavamina chirat partha maya veshita chetasam. I'm going to make a few small changes while reading. But those who, depending exclusively on me and surrendering all actions to me, regarding me as the supreme goal, meditating on me with single-minded devotion, and whose mind is set on me, I become before long, O Arjuna, the deliverer from the ocean of death and transmigration, otherwise known as samsara. Regarding this verse, a well-known Mahatma, Sri Ramakrishna Deva, has said, "There are harbingers of the attainment of Godhood. One in whom bhakti is surging with fervor has already come to the threshold of divinity. Know it for certain that he will very soon attain union with God." Again, Jnanadev has something very nice to say here. When he talks about devotion and devotees, he just can't control himself. So here he provides elaborate details regarding just how dedicated his devotees are to him. And after praising their sacrifice, he says, "How can I speak about them? What words can adequately describe my feelings towards them?" Just imagine Amma saying this about her children. She calls us her darling children. It's a kind of infatuated, perspective. But he continues, "Ultimately, I am forced to do all they wish for. It is as if I have taken out a charter to protect my devotees, defeating their enemies. But even without that, the very idea of my devotees being plunged into anxiety for the welfare of their family appears ludicrous. Does the wife of a fabulously rich man ever have to go begging for alms? Of course not. Similarly, my devotees are like my wife. I feel my honor is at stake whenever they are likely to suffer disgrace." See, the beautiful thing about Jnanadev's commentary is he speaks in the first person. Everything he says there is either a narration of what's happening, if that's what the Gita is talking about, or if it's Krishna speaking, he stands in the footsteps of Krishna and says, this is what Krishna also said. He supplements. Not your average commentator can do such a thing. It's so engrossing. This couplet of verses provides a summary of the preparation process, which will be followed up by 4 other options. So he gave us the description of Akshara Upasana, means worship of the formless Brahman. Now he's considering people like us, and he's coming down one notch. He's going to keep going down to the simplest of methods that everybody can practice. So this is option 2 that we're hearing. Okay? We're starting from the hardest, coming down to the easiest. And with each method he proposes, we can just imagine that he's reading Arjuna's mind, just like Amma reads our mind. And he says, that doesn't suit him, he can't do it. So, well, let me tell him another one. And then he reads his mind, he doesn't have confidence. Okay, I'm going to tell him another one like that. So that way he's also ensuring that all of us can get something, can latch onto something that actually works for us, our level of preparation. He's omniscient, so he even knows what is coming in the future. That was just the beginning of Kali Yuga at their time. Now, Corona Yuga, as part of Kali Yuga, everything. So he knows that we need simpler explanations. So these two verses are considered to be talking about worship of the universal form. So that is what was discussed in chapter 11. It's also a big part of this chapter. And a lot of these verses are, he says me, but he means the Vishwarupa, or the universal form. And this is, he says, is a very good way to pray, prepare yourself for worshipping the formless Brahman. How so? How does it help us? Well, when we look from the standpoint of the totality, we understand that our body is just part of that totality, right? When Amma worships us because we are part of the totality. She doesn't worship, oh Shantamritananda, so special. He's my special son. It's not like that. If she smiles at me, she says, here's this facet of the totality. Oh, and then there's another facet of the totality. Everything is beautiful. So we want that affection, but it's not just because we are who we think we are, this body. It's definitely not because of that. And we come to understand that our mind, as we know it, belongs to the universal mind. All these things, there are technical names for these: universal mind, universal body, universal intellect in the scriptures. We won't go into that. But understanding, looking at the world and ourselves in that way, helps us relinquish the identification to this limited body. So the progression of that would be, try to see the totality, number one, because that's the kind of devotion that he's espousing here. Worship the whole world as God. Then see yourself not as separate from the totality, but of course part of the totality, not just physically, energetically, emotionally, intellectually, in every way. And then gradually try to shift that identification from this to this, because this is the reality of our being, according to Amma and all the scriptures. And as we transfer our identification to the totality, then we slowly, at the same pace, we can start to understand and actually assimilate that formless aspect of ourselves. We can own up to that, realize it little by little. It's not moksha at that point. It's just little baby steps towards moksha as we break down these misconceptions of our self to be as being limited. So when Krishna says here, surrender all actions to me, what does he mean? He means make all your actions an offering to the totality, not an offering just on your altar. You don't go to a temple and say, I'm going to give it to this deity right here, the one that's in this temple. You can use the temple as a way to remember that Shiva, Krishna, Devi are everywhere, and then use that to remember, and then say, I'm offering this to the all-pervasive deity in the temple. That's perfectly fine, in the puja room. But we're supposed to be thinking of it as an offering to the totality, not just some statue. Dedicating our actions is good for many reasons. So this is the benefit of karma yoga, if you keep these in mind. It's a key aspect of karma yoga, which purifies us. It reduces the doership notion and all the karmic repercussions of feeling that I am the doer. It also makes us think twice before doing something selfish. Right? Like, I'm offering this action to God or Amma, but how can I offer something selfish? How can I offer something adharmic to Amma. I can't do that. So when you think of it as an offering, there's some kind of restrictions, self-imposed restrictions on what kind of actions we're going to do. It also makes us feel like a pujari or a priest, priestess. We are the priest or priestess of our life, and our daily activities are the puja. So when we look at it that way, there's a more of a sanctity to our daily activities. So while performing our actions, how do we know we are regarding God as the supreme goal? Because that's what he says, regard me as the supreme goal. Well, the answer to that comes in the verse. We are meditating on God with single-minded devotion. Single-minded devotion. Do I have that or not? Shankaracharya says that it is undivided union without having any object other than that of the Vishwarupa. It's a pretty extreme statement, isn't it? It also makes us feel like we might not be qualified for this. We can try it. Try to just have all your thoughts flow towards the totality. It can be a form, but it's the total form. It's not the formless, but form of this whole creation. And nothing else. Not like, when do I have to get up and go to work? Or what am I having for dinner? No thoughts like that come in if we're going to do this kind of sadhana. So it's not a simple thing, but if we think of Amma as the totality, it definitely becomes easier. We need a symbol of the totality. So if we start to make that our practice, seeing Amma as totality and focusing on Amma, when we close our eyes, when we meditate, we have a little bit better chance of being able to maintain that concentration. And also, throughout the day, if we remember Amma, the more we remember Amma, the more likely we're to do the right thing. We'll think like, oh, Amma wouldn't want me to do this, so I shouldn't do it. Or, what would Amma do? She would do A, not B, so let me do A. These kind of things really help us in life, because without that guidance, inner guidance from Amma's presence, it's a lot of confusion. People come to us with a lot of questions, so I know I don't have to get married to know. One of Ramana Maharishi's most famous writings, called Upadesha Saram, contains a beautiful verse that is relevant here. It's verse 5. Serving the world with the attitude of serving the Lord is the true worship of God. It's like a perfect description of Amma and what she's encouraging us to do. So this is part of that Vishwarupa Upasana, worshipping the universal form. And as I said a moment ago, single-minded means undivided devotion. So this means that so long as we have other desires and goals in mind when we are praying, it is not undivided. We've already divided it. There's no such thing as undivided devotion to anything if we have any of our own personal desires mixed in there. It's a very extreme kind of worship, even this. Even though it's one step down, it's not easy. Right now, I think most people, we all feel like our energy is dispersed in countless directions because we're so concerned about so many things. We want moksha, we want liberation, and this, and this, and this. So there's not supposed to be any and in the equation. If you're a kid, it's okay. I'll tell you a story about a kid who did that. There's some of you may know a girl her name is Tessa. She happens to be the daughter of my biological brother. And I'll confess that when she was born and my brother told me that he had a baby girl, I said, I'll be a monkey's uncle. I realized that was not the right thing to say at the time, but I do have a niece. And she came to Amma once during darshan, many times during darshan. I happened to be sitting there next to Amma. And it was a while back, so when she was maybe 4 or 5 or something. And at that age, a lot of kids come to Amma for one thing: chocolate, right? So she came, and I looked at her, and she's like, looking really like excited. And I said, "What are you here for?" Because I play around with her like that, And I said, "Are you here for chocolate?" And she was, She didn't try to hide it at all. And I said, "You're here for chocolate? Or you're here for Amma?" And I said, "What if you had to choose Amma or chocolate? Which one would you choose?" She didn't know what to say. She got stuck there. And then by that time, Amma had, figured out that, maybe she thought I was bullying her or something. And she said, what are you guys talking about?" And then I said, "Amma, she wants chocolate." And so I asked her, "Do you want chocolate or Amma? What if you could have only one?" And Amma started laughing. And Amma looked at her and then said, "What's your response?" And she says, "I want Amma and chocolate." And I was like, "You can't have both." And Amma laughed so hard. And then Amma said, Amma made a decision a long time ago to turn her life into a celebration of selflessness. So now she gives the chocolate of happiness. She can give the chocolate of happiness to everybody. Share it with everybody. And this little girl, she wasn't quite sure what to make of that. And I thought it was a beautiful thing to say. And then she turned to me and she says, "Does this mean I have to share my chocolate with everybody?" I said, no. And actually I said, "Yeah." And then I said, "Don't worry, I'm just kidding." So anyhow, there shouldn't be any "I want Amma and this and that." It should be "I want only Amma." For the sake of moksha, a true seeker will really be ready to give up everything else. That means it requires a tremendous amount of dispassion, non-attachment. Detachment, non-attachment. So God has to be the only goal in our life. It's hard, unless you see everything as God. That's why, He's encouraging us to do that. But once we are prepared, we can do that. We can see God everywhere and worship this Vishwarupa, or this universal form, as God. And from there we can worship the formless. And he says, "I become their deliverer from the ocean of death and transmigration before long." That means he'll do what he has already done for us, which is give us a Sadguru, give us Amma. And then Amma is going to show us how to uproot the vasanas and purify ourselves so we are qualified to higher levels of worship and meditation. So through Amma, we are being provided with the ideal conditions for sadhana. All we have to do is make use of them. That's the challenge that lies before us. And let us move on to verse 8 and see how he's going to continue this message. Mayeva mana adhatsva Mayi buddhim niveshaya nivasishasi Mayeva ata urdhvam na samshayaha. Again, taking a little bit of liberty in rendering this verse. Fix your mind on me alone and establish your intellect in me. Thereafter, you shall no doubt abide in me. So again, me means the Vishwarupa, or the universal form, according to Shankaracharya. This is not my interpretation, it's Shankaracharya's. So Krishna, why does he have to mention both the mind and the intellect? It's because they have different roles to play. The mind is in charge of feeling things, and the intellect is in charge of analyzing things, determining things, discerning one thing from another. So how do we fix these two on Amma? Well, the mind is the source of all of our emotions. And when you think about how your day goes, most of the time we're in the mind. Very rarely are we in the intellect. We are, we've got emotions. We're happy, we're sad, we like this thing, dislike that thing. All these kind of things, we're on the level of the mind. So it's very important for us to figure out how are we going to fix this mind on Amma. So I'll give you a few examples of how people do that unconsciously, just because they have a deep love for Amma. This is a commercial for cultivating love for Amma. You can hear I'm repeating it over and over again. So there was a devotee who came with the whole family for darshan, and I happened to be behind Amma at the time. And it was a couple that had 2 daughters. And the elder daughter was old enough where, in American culture you would expect her to be dating people. So, and she makes herself look nice and wears nice clothes. So when she came for darshan, Amma said, "You have a boyfriend?" Or a partner like that. And then she got so angry at Amma. She says, "Amma, how can I have a boyfriend when you gave me a father like this? There's no hope for having any relationships with boys. It's your fault you gave me this father." And my mom, she's just as bad, like that. It was so cute because, that these are kids that have grown up around Amma. And so they have that feeling like Amma determines everything in their life. So even anger, they have no hesitation, directing it to Amma. It's better than getting mad at your parents, right? Because you can't change your parents. And it's not like you can make them your aradhana murti, your statue of worship, Through Amma, you can fix it. That's the only way to fix these things. Another disciple, this is a long time ago, he used to get so frustrated that Amma was not giving him more vairagya, more dispassion, and all the other, needed spiritual qualities. He would come to Amma and say, "Amma, this vairagya is nothing. You have to give me more. I'm trying, but you have to help me. Why aren't you helping me?" His frustration, again, he's directing it towards Amma. And then impatience as well. People would meditate and say, "Amma, you're not showing me your form. I can't wait any longer. You have to give me your darshan inside." So they direct all these emotions that we would typically think of as negative emotions, they direct them at Amma. And they're for spiritual reasons. It's not just, you want Amma to give you darshan faster only, It's internal things they're praying for. And others direct their sorrow at Amma because she doesn't take enough rest. So all of our emotions can be directed towards Amma in one way or another. And many people might not even know that Adi Shankaracharya himself was a great devotee, despite all the highly intellectual teachings he bestowed upon the world. His commentary on the Brahma Sutras alone is enough to make you want to bow down to his feet, to his intellectual prowess. But the very same Shankaracharya also wrote Shivananda Lahari, Saundarya Lahari, full of devotion. And in the Shivananda Lahari, he says things like, "Who needs logic? Let's just sing the Lord's glory. Let's all go to Kailasa." It's 100% devotion. And that outpouring of love and devotion towards Lord Shiva just seems like an entirely different person. But it's proof that both our devotion and knowledge can evolve side by side and exist side by side. There's no need to choose only one forever. There will be phases in our evolution. There are phases when we need to focus on bhakti. We need to focus on karma yoga. And we also need to relinquish all forms and just try to meditate on the formless. But if Shankaracharya embraces both at the same time. When we reach that level, we should be able to do it. Don't think that we're forever done with Karma Yoga, forever done with Bhakti. Because Amma's not. How can we be? The greatest of Mahatmas can go back and forth at will, just as Amma does. You can see it in her bhajans. Now the bhajans have so many different takes on spirituality. There are bhajans just about Karma Yoga. There are bhajans just about Bhakti. All I want is you, Devi, all I want is you. I don't want anything else. I just want to wash your feet with my tears of devotion. And then there's songs like Kodanukoti, which says like, "Oh, truth eternal, mankind has been searching for you for millions of years." It's talking about the truth eternal, the self. We have so many bhajans that cover the gamut of spirituality, and Amma sings all of them. So what Amma's trying to teach us is something she calls Tattvatile Bhakti. Tattvatile Bhakti. It means devoted, rooted in the understanding of spiritual principles. So we need bhakti, but we need our bhakti, our devotion, to be based on deep understanding. Not just superficial, or this God is my stockbroker, or he's my doctor, or he's my matchmaker, like that. No. We have to have a deeper understanding. Without that deeper understanding, we can easily succumb to a lot of confusion on the spiritual path and even lose faith in the end. So a devotee was talking about how she met Amma, and she said that she left her previous master when her mother died of cancer because she thought, if God is so cruel to allow someone to die of cancer in such a painful way, I don't want such a God. Of course, she didn't understand the theory of karma. After she met Amma, she started learning all these things and understood there's more to spirituality, but she didn't know those things before, so for some period of time, she just left the spiritual path. So that's why Amma says we need to understand the tattvam, the principles behind devotion. So this brings us to the topic of establishing the intellect in God, the Supreme Being. We should understand that the individual exists only because of the totality. That's why we pray, Lokaha samastaha sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere in all worlds be happy. We don't pray for ourselves, ever. Because we want to learn how to see ourselves as part of the totality. Oh God, may I have peace and happiness. I've never heard of such a prayer in the Indian tradition, the spiritual tradition at least. So all of these prayers, all of the ceremonies are intended to teach us to expand our concept. So we should understand that we only exist because of the totality, and also our body is part of the total body, our emotions are part of the total mind. All these assimilation has to take place. There are some examples that are used very commonly in India's scriptures that help us understand how we are an integral, inseparable part of the totality. And you may have heard these many times, but this is when we need to remember them when we're learning things like this. So, the wave and the ocean, or the water droplet and the ocean. The water droplet or the little wave may think, oh, I have such a short lifetime. But if he remembers that he is actually the water or the ocean, then he or she will understand that they don't have a limited existence. They are formless. They are eternal. And just like the pot can feel that he died, when the pot cracks. But if he identifies with the clay, everything made out of the clay is clay in essence. So the same essence pervades everything, no matter what shape the pot is. He might say, I'm a handsome pot. The other person says, oh, I'm a small pot. I'm a ugly pot. But we look at the essence of clay, we understand that it's all the same. That's the totality in this case. In the case of jewelry, gold is the totality. In the case of a table like this one, wood is the totality. These are just similes, they're just metaphors. So understand that just like there's no table without the wood or no jewelry without the gold, there's no individual other than God's universal form. So constant remembrance of this reality is the sadhana that Krishna is talking about. That also, constantly remembering that is the intellectual aspect of that sadhana, re-establishing the intellect in remembrance of the Supreme Being. And what is the result of that? He says, you shall no doubt abide in me. You will never be separated from me because you've understood finally that I am everywhere, always. So this topic of Vishwarupa Upasana or Virada Upasana, worship of the universal form, is being laid out in this way. And as I said, he's going to give a total of 5 options. And this is the second one. The first one was the formless, worshipping the formless, that difficult path that Shankaracharya and Jnanadev were talking about. And Krishna himself said it briefly. So right now we might feel we lack the subtlety to practice either one of these sadhanas. And Krishna knows that, Amma knows that. That's why he is going to give us other options next week. So, as I said earlier, I'm intended to reply to the questions from last week at the end. We finished the verses for this week. So I'll move on to the questions. The first question that was emailed to us, we're taking it by email, and you can send yours to the Q&A address that was in the chat last week. I hope someone posts it again today, so you can send your questions to that address for next week. It's a little too hard to do it through the chat window. Everything's moving so quickly. So one question that came was, I listen to Archana every evening, but I don't chant it. Is this still beneficial? Of course, it's beneficial. It's certainly not harmful, that's for sure. But it's definitely not as beneficial as chanting it out loud. Definitely chanting it out loud is the best in the beginning. And after you've been chanting it out loud for a long time, you can start chanting it in a soft voice. And an even more powerful way, if we concentrate properly, would be to chant it under our breath, silently. After some time, people memorize it, and they can chant it under their breath. And so it's, that subtle internal chanting has a additional power. But there is something very special about chanting it out loud as a group. Amma has said that over and over again, and she has emphasized the importance and encouraged people to do it. You may know that when she was first inaugurating the Brahmasthana temples, there was a 5-day inaugural period where they prepared the holy land there, the holy spot, that place, through chanting Archana 5 times a day, thousands of people, and that means 5,000 mantras being chanted by each person. And you have thousands of people on top of that. That's millions, tens of millions of mantras are being chanted on that spot. After that purification process took place is when Amma would install the murti, or the sculpture, the idol, in the sanctum sanctorum. So that shows you just how powerful the vibrations of those mantras are. And we can use that for our own benefit. It can help us on every level: physical, mental, energetically. It gives clarity to the intellect. All these things. Children should chant it, Amma has said also, because it helps them, the development of their intellect when they're studying. So they have such a divine vibration. They have a profound effect on every aspect of our being, especially when we do it out loud, because there's like a resonance, like a tuning fork, that takes place when you actually chant it out loud. So that's my suggestion, is to chant it out loud initially, and over time you will also start to understand the meaning, which takes us even deeper. So the next question is, they wanted the links for the previous courses, previous classes. So I am requesting you send your, the person who requested that can send your email to that, send an email to the question answer address. I think you have that from last time. Everything was on the chat. Actually, I made a mistake in explaining. These questions are not submitted by email. I'm sorry. They're submitted by a Google form. That was the link that we put in the chat. My mistake. So that form link, if it's not there now, hopefully it will be by the end of the live stream. Otherwise, we can put it in the description of the video afterwards, so that you can send your questions to that Google form. So they're requesting those previous classes, and we'll share the links if we get their email address. And this is the question. During the previous class, it was recommended to meditate on verses 235 to 264 of a book. Actually, it's the wrong numbers, which I'll correct in a moment. She says she was not able to grasp the title of the suggested resource. Okay, so the resource is something called Viveka-Chudamani. Viveka-Chudamani. I hope one of us can type that into the chat. I'm not on the chat right now. And that Viveka-Chudamani is by Shankaracharya. Chudamani, it means the crest jewel of discrimination. Discrimination means discernment in this case, not the other kind of discrimination. So, and the verses were actually verses 254 to 264. It's a beautiful passage where Shankaracharya himself wrote this, and he's guiding us through a meditation on ourself, on our true self. And you can just read one of those mantras each day and meditate like that. That's like what Krishna is talking about, saying it's so difficult to meditate on yourself as that. But you can, if you want to try, you can read one of those verses from the Viveka-Chudamani and see how it feels. The third and last question that I have for tonight is, when Amma was young, she would remember Krishna at every step, and when she would forget, she would go two steps back, much like the mantra story I told. Why was she doing that? She knew already her true nature and was in constant bliss, of course. Very good observation, very good question. Well, as with everything that Amma does in her life, it is not for her own sake. It is not for her spiritual evolution. It is not, has nothing to do with her as an individual. So just let's all throw out all thoughts like that. Amma never does anything for, what we think of as ourself, herself. Because she doesn't have any karma, she doesn't have any prarabdha, she has no needs of her own to come to this planet and be with us in this Kali Yuga. She could have come, she could have said, I'm only going to come during Satya Yuga when everybody's nice. I don't want to see all these horrible people in Kali Yuga, you know. I don't want to associate with them. They're so terrible. You know, she comes even in Kali Yuga. That means that she's coming because we have problems. We need help. Nothing to do with her needs. So in the Gita, Krishna also says, I don't need anything in the three worlds, yet I still do actions. He says it's for the good of the world, for the welfare of the entire world. That's the exact same thing that Amma's doing. When the circumstances on the planet are so terrible that somebody has to come, like it's the vaccine for the selfishness virus, then the universe sends the vaccine, the real vaccine. That's an avatara. That's a incarnation of God. From my standpoint, I won't force this on anybody. From my standpoint, Amma she was born divine. She didn't need to do any of these things. I think the person writing this also sort of feels the same way. So it means that just like the vaccine doesn't need a vaccine for itself, right? It is the vaccine. So Amma is the vaccine for all the selfishness and ignorance on the planet now. So her existence is that. Everything she does becomes that corrective presence on the planet. So assume that everything she does is for others, not for herself. She's teaching us, showing us how to achieve realization. That's the only purpose of her birth. So, since Amma is dedicating herself entirely to her children, however adorable or non-adorable we may be, we really owe her our appreciation and gratitude. We can take a moment to just feel a deep gratitude, thankfulness to Amma for coming at a time in the world's history where things are so traumatic, so negative, so dark, and providing a blinding light of love and compassion to wipe it all away. And we'll conclude the class tonight with two mantras, Asatoma and Loka Samasta. We'll chant Loka Samasta 9 times as well. When we chant these mantras, remember, at least for these few seconds, let us try to remember the totality. Look at these prayers from the standpoint of the totality. Not me. I don't want peace for myself. I don't want happiness for myself. Truth, light, and immortality for the totality, not just from me. Keep that in mind as we pray. And when we chant Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu 9 times, you can also visualize the white flowers of peace showering constantly upon the entire earth from the entire sky. That is, in fact, a symbolic representation of peace on the universal form. Take a deep breath. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. 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 Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Namah Shivaya. This is the official conclusion of the class. Those who wish to remain for a meditation are invited to do so, with the intention of trying to assimilate and absorb these teachings we just heard about. So close your eyes, check your posture, take a few long, deep breaths. Try to feel your mind and body relaxing further and further with each and every inhalation and exhalation. Try to feel a powerful presence all around you. Amma's subtle energy enveloping you. Giving you darshan within as well. Now focus on the rhythmic flow of your breathing process. Allow your mind to flow along simultaneously with the peaceful flow of each inhalation and exhalation. Be fully aware of your breath. The more we focus on the breath in this way, the subtler our awareness becomes. We can visualize more clearly with a mind that is more focused. As you breathe in, be aware of the energy, the subtle energy that is carried along with the breath, the prana shakti. Feel that pure energy coming in with the breath. Spreading through the entire body. Reinvigorating, revitalizing each and every cell. And as you breathe out, feel the prana shakti that goes outwards. Same subtle power, different function. That prana shakti is constantly moving. It never stays in one place. So when it comes to us, it is coming from somewhere else. And with our exhalation, that energy is also leaving and going elsewhere. Other microscopic beings are interacting with that same energy. The trees outside will eventually use the carbon dioxide. The air outside this place where you live, where you are now, that will come inside, the inside air will go outside. So don't think of your breath as just your breath. It is the prana of the totality. There's only one prana shakti in this world. It's always moving. It's flowing in and out of us and everybody else, all beings, all the time. There's no such thing as my breath, my prana shakti. We can meditate in the same way on our thoughts and emotions. If we are having restless thoughts or angry thoughts, sad thoughts, those can be measured as brain waves. The mental level is not limited only to us. Our thought waves affect those around us and the entire world. That's why Amma says that the selfish thoughts of mankind has damaged Mother Nature. So there's no such thing as only my own thoughts. My thoughts are affected by the total mind as well, just like Mother Nature is. It is the universal mind. I am affected by it, and my thoughts affect it also. In fact, it is only one, just like air. The same can be said for the intellect and our soul. There's only one. If we can at least see our being as being one with this universal form, it is a huge leap for us spiritually. You can try to practice in this way. And anytime your mind wanders, refocus it on Amma, on her form. That will help us get re-centered and regain our consciousness, our concentration. Let us close with one final mantra, Purnamadam. And again, remember the meaning of which is the totality is ever full, no matter what happens to this world and what happens to us, happens to anybody. The totality is forever full and perfect. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyade Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Om Namah Shivaya, and hope to see you next week.